not necessarily important to, if I just get to the school, I'll be able to get those kinds of gigs, is just wrong. And if there's anything that I can ever impress upon people that are looking at going to school, is that idea of I'm an electric bass player, and if I can just get into Berklee and I can just get taught by this person, I can end up on the Grammys one day. It's yeah, that is a step on the ladder, but to say, well, if I just do this, that'll do this.
I love today's guest so much. I last saw him, actually, it was in person, after Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. He was playing bass for that, the touring production, and was playing here in San Francisco. And it feels like it was a million years ago, but it was actually pretty recently. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we are talking today with David White, who last appeared on the podcast way back in 2016, 600 episodes ago or something like that. He has played for so many Broadway and National Touring shows, including, like I said, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, also the Bridges of Madison County, Motown the Musical, The Producers, Hair, Guys and Dolls, many other productions. Really interesting artist, and I'd love to have David on once a month. It'd be great, but we connected specifically for this episode to talk about music school. What is the value of music school? Yeah, how has that played into his life or not, which we kind of get into. It's a subject that I've been exploring a lot on the podcast here as I ponder that question. What is the value of music school? And it's a question I feel is important to ponder, especially for someone like me who doesn't teach anywhere. And so I don't really have a vested interest either way, just trying to get it out and talk about this with people who have experience like David. We, of course, can't help but talk about the pandemic and what that's like being someone playing in musical theater. Short answer, it's not good, but he's handling it quite well, as you can hear. So let's get into it. Quick shout out to our sponsors, Dorico, Ear Trumpet Labs, Practisma, and Modacity. More on them later. But here we go with a round two with the great and powerful David White. Last time I saw you, we were in the Tenderloin, standing outside of, I think, the Golden Gate Theater after my wife and I checked out Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, right? When was
Correct.
that? Was that last year or?
That would have been last year. I don't remember what time of year it was. Unfortunately, everything has just dissolved into a blank nothingness this past year. So I have no idea what time anything, what day it is, what year it is. Yeah, it's, if it wasn't for the election, I would have no idea what month we were in.
Right. So Right. I know, well, it's particularly hard for me out here because the weather is so similar all year. I just, it's just sort of like eternal spring out here. It feels like it was in 2019 at some point, but that was really cool. That was a lot of fun to see. That was the first time we'd seen any musical theater in San Francisco. So that was.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How long have you been there at that point,
though? 4 years, maybe. We moved out here. So it's funny because I was looking back. You and I talked for the podcast in 2016, which feels like astonishingly long ago, actually. And that was like the month after I moved to San Francisco. So I think we've been out here 4 years, 5 years.
Wow, has it been that long? Jeez.
Yeah, time flies. I know.
My goodness. How's she doing with all of this? Because she works in the medical field, right?
Yeah, well, she got hired at University of California, San Francisco in January, which was amazing timing because they did a hiring freeze for the next 2 years, I think, for the whole system. So she just squeezed in early April or something like that with the pandemic, which seems bizarre that you would put a hiring freeze on doctors during a pandemic, but whatever.
Yeah.
One of many bizarre things. So
nothing surprises me anymore.
Yeah, I know. So we moved into this place a week before shelter in place in San Francisco and bought a place, moved in. And so I've just been staring out this window here for the last 9 months watching. I had 0 plants out here when we moved in, and now I've had tomatoes come and go and like a whole season. So it's crazy,
so
man.
You turned into like an Earth Mother thing.
Yeah, I mean exactly. So it's been
nice.
It's been interesting. It's so you've probably were you playing in New York City when the pandemic hit? Were you doing a show in town?
I was doing a show on the road. I was out with Beautiful, the Carole King show. for maybe 3.5 weeks. Like I had just, somebody else, Frank Canino had started the tour. I came in, would have been like the second week of February, somewhere in there. And then March 13th was when everything hit the fan. So we were in Houston, I think, Houston or Galveston, one of those places. And we were on our way to the theater, and our company manager like stood up at the front of the bus and was just like, "Hey, so we're going to check you into the hotel, and then we're going to take you to the theater later, and you're going to get as much stuff as you can. And then we're going to put you on flights back home, and we'll call each of you and ask where you want to go." Because, you know, on tour, most people get rid of their apartment. So people are just like, well, I guess I'll just call my dad and be like, "Hey, can I crash with you guys for a couple of weeks?" Like, and we still thought, you know, at that point, I was like, oh, I'm glad I don't have a show in town, because, you know, New York's getting hit pretty hard. Tours will be okay. And now it's November. So, yeah, it was obviously, I mean, as with everybody, things have changed quite drastically. But yeah, I had just joined the show and was still just like really learning the book and getting my feet wet, and people were still getting to know my name. And then it closed down, and, you know, was having Zoom calls with our company manager as she's rummaging through the back of a semi truck to be like, "Oh, there's my upright," and like, "Look for my electric case. It has this sticker on the side of it," and, you know, getting it FedExed back to me. So.
How crazy. It's
Yeah.
I mean, I guess this is kind of obvious to people probably, but like the people who have risen to the height of the profession in music performance are people like what you're doing, like you're just playing. You know, I was talking to Derek Jones, who's played Cirque du Soleil's show Ka, you know, for years and years. Like that's, and so it's tough because if you're performing all the time, like diversifying and you know, doing all these other things and teaching and what have you, everything that you can, like you've kind of risen to a point where you're not even thinking about that because you're just so busy performing all the time. So it just seems like this is like particularly gruesome for like my friends in the San Francisco Symphony, you know, like looking at them who have, you know, I don't think there's any sign of any performing in the future. You know, someone could correct me, but I don't think I haven't heard one bit about some actual, you know, thing happening. Right. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, there's like, you can diversify yourself within the performance realm, but you know, I find myself in a situation where it's like, well, okay, what can I do to generate income? I'm like, I guess I could teach, but quite frankly, all of a sudden the market has become so flooded with people that, quite frankly, and I don't mean to throw a pity party for myself, but quite frankly, do it better than I can. So it's like, well, am I going to go through the entire rigmarole of trying to set up a studio that I'm just going to end up abandoning as soon as performance comes back? You know, that's not fair to the people that are signing up for it. And quite frankly, that's not fair to the people who have devoted their lives to trying to better that, you know, the education part of it. So it's been a tough time for sure. I mean, I'm very lucky, without, you know, getting into the weeds too much, I'm very lucky that because my jobs have been predominantly union, they've been on W-2s, that, you know, I qualified for normal unemployment. I didn't have to worry about any of that PUA stuff. But I know a lot of other friends that are purely dealing on 1099s or cash gigs under the table that are in a very different place than I am. And, you know, you wish them nothing but the best, but there's only so much that you can do. And it's this weird kind of flailing vibe of performers that it's like, well, we can't seem to get anybody to take us seriously. That it's like, well, this is gonna fall apart if you don't help us. But everybody's kind of out for themselves and part of it is out of necessity, and the other part of it is like, we still fall into that camp of like, oh, well, that's a fun job, so, you know, it must not be that serious. You know what I mean? It's very easy to sweep that under the rug, as opposed to falling under like an academic camp where you're working at a college and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I know. So, yeah, it's what's the vibe like? Because are you in Queens? Is that where?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm still
in Queens.
Okay. How's the city doing? Because I mean, San Francisco and New York are different places, but there are a lot of similarities too, like these dense urban centers.
Yeah, it's rough.
Yeah.
I mean, it's okay. Better. It's better now than it was. I feel like actually seeing the news, I feel like San Francisco and New York locked down at the same time because we have such a huge influx of international traffic.
Yep.
And the minute that we kind of found out that it was predominantly the virus was coming from Europe, there's so many of those flights that go through New York that it just spread like crazy here. And then my wife and I are pretty sure that we had it pretty early on. So, you know, we did the full lockdown and everything. So New York in general is, at the beginning of this was scary. I mean, like there was a vibe of like, is it okay to go to the grocery store? You know, I'm just watching Cuomo's press conferences every single moment of the day, trying to desperately find out more information. You know, I finally, after about 2 months of kind of keeping to my one little corner of Queens here, ventured into Manhattan, and I have a very distinct view that I don't think I'm ever going to forget. I was right on the corner of like 57th or 58th. It's right by Radio City. And I was 57th and 8th and 6th, and I could look all the way down Radio City past Bryant Park, which is like 16, 17 blocks, and there was not a single car. And like, it was like I Am Legend. To not see a single cab on 6th Avenue in the middle of the afternoon was scary. New York is doing a lot better now than it was. I mean, but cases are on the rise again, and you know, there's clubs that are fighting to survive, and you know, it's a little dire. I mean, I know a lot of people that have just either like, well, we'll come back to the city eventually, or have just full on bailed, and I don't blame them one bit. I'm lucky that you know, my wife has a job in the normal sector. Right. she's a textbook editor. So we're at least still able to have that kind of income and stuff. So, you know, we'll get through it. It's just like New York it's going to take a while for the rebuild to occur.
Yeah, you know, I've been thinking about similar things here. Again, different places, but a lot of similarities. San Francisco, New York, and you know, I believe in city living long term. I'm not super digging city living in 2020. You know, all the
yeah.
So I kind of wish I was just in some suburb and wherever. You know, I had a yard and a bit more space, because all the things that make city living exciting are just like, you know, have the reverse effect in a pandemic.
Totally. Well, and I mean, like, we live in a small one bedroom apartment, and things like, you know, I normally would practice in the middle of the day when everybody in my building was gone, and then my wife was at work, so I never thought about like the fact that all of a sudden we're in a situation where I need to dodge her Zoom calls with her work, so I'm going into the bedroom, but it's the middle of summer and we don't have AC in the bedroom. So I can only practice for a half hour at a time before I'm drenched in sweat. And, you know, just like little things like that you just don't think about until you're like, oh yeah, I guess we have to spend 23 hours a day in this place. And like, you know, I don't want to completely atrophy on my instrument. But, you know, at the same time, it's that motivation is sometimes difficult to come by when you're in the middle of a global pandemic. So it's like trying to figure out how to work around each other was a whole new game. And, you know, this tiny little apartment we didn't think about when I was constantly running out the door to go to another gig and she was at work. It's just, you know, when we're in here all the time now, it's like, oh yeah, how do we do this?
This episode is brought to you by the Practisma Practice Journal. And here's author Susanna Klein on one of the biggest challenges about practicing.
Practice is so painfully incremental. That's just the nature of it. And so anytime we can kind of make it lighter, give it like a little jolt, or make it, oh, that was a little better. Or we trick ourselves, like, you know, when we're talking about doing rhythm practice, some of that is for the fingers. A lot of it's just for our head. Like, it gets you to, oh, now I'm listening to these notes. Now I'm listening to these other notes more. Now I'm listening to these notes more. Yeah, you could just play the whole thing like god awfully slow, but boredom is terrible for the practice room.
I'm a big fan of this journal. I've gone through all 16 weeks myself on my own personal journey. It is so cool what Susanna's created. It's packed with research-based strategies to turn your ho-hum practice into extraordinary practice, and it really works. Learn more at practisma.com, where you can download the introductory chapter of the journal for free. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. I'm so happy that my course, Beginners Classical Bass, is out in the world on Discover Double Bass, and we've been getting some great feedback. Here's Barry Green, instructor of bass at The Ohio State University, former principal bassist of the Cincinnati Symphony, and author of The Inner Game of Music. Barry writes about the course. This wonderful, extensive course includes 14 chapters of 66 lessons, varying in length from 1 to 8 minutes each. It is so comprehensive. While it is called a beginner's course, this only means that the course begins with the parts of the instrument, including how to take the bass out of the case. However, it also takes the player through the most advanced left and right hand techniques, including shifting, pivoting, harmonics, positions up to the thumb position, tuning the bass, scales and arpeggios, as well as left hand techniques of dynamics, bow placement, articulations, including portato, staccato, and slurring. Barry, thank you so much. And folks, if you haven't checked it out, you can find it through the link in the show notes, or just visit discoverdouble-bass.com/Jason Heath.
Right. Sounds like we have a very similar setup. We also have a astonishingly expensive one-bedroom place in San Francisco. And the city was our living room, right? That's what we would always say. We just sleep here.
Right.
And my on-the-road time pales in comparison to what you've been doing. But I was still typically on the road a fair amount, at least a week a month. And so, we're living a lot closer. My wife's out of the house a lot of the time, but more at home than typically. And then I'm just constantly at home. What's the experience has been weird for me for the last 9 months. Zero. I've literally not left the city of San Francisco. Not because I'm scared to leave, but it's just what am I going to do? So I've just been here, and I've barely even left my neighborhood, which is so bizarre because I think there was never one day in the 4 years I've been living here when I didn't leave my neighborhood at least. What has it been? And I mean, it seems like everybody's got at least a little bit of a silver lining, especially people who've been getting off the road. What's it been like not being on the road to the level you had been for years, really?
Well, it's been nice to see my friends and my wife. That's been a nice change of pace. Honestly, it's this weird vibe. I've been talking with some friends about this a lot recently, that it's a weird situation to be in because you have to kind of almost define your personality around being a musician. Part of that is out of necessity, that when that gets taken away, you're left with this kind of void that it almost feels like somebody has taken your personality away, for lack of a better term. It's been really nice to be able to kind of create our little pod here in Queens and see my friends on a regular basis. I mean, my close friends have 2 kids here, so I've been this kind of de facto babysitter in residence thing, which is hilarious to me because the fact that anybody would choose me to leave their children with is hilarious. But it's been things like I have found that I've kind of fallen back in love with music again. In the sense of when, and I'm sure most orchestral players will understand this, is when you're constantly kind of getting ready for the next gig and you're constantly shedding, and it's always about the next thing. And it's almost to a point of when it is nothing but performance, it's a matter of getting that check mark crossed off that thing on the list crossed off in terms of, okay, I've got that done, on to the next thing. So you're not really delving super deep into the things of if I'm getting ready for a wedding gig, I'm okay, do I know these 50 songs? Fine, great. Am I totally worried about, they do this lick in the second verse that is this cool counter melody to this or whatever? So I found a lot more time to listen, and I found a lot more time to have honest feedback with myself. And I've also found this idea of kind of recentering what it is that you want from a career, because I've definitely come to understand that just because you're busy doesn't mean that anything's any good. I can have 7 gigs a week, but if they're all, if I'm not invested in any of them, or if I don't find them challenging or at least monetarily rewarding, whatever the case might be, then what am I really doing? I'm just running myself ragged.
Yeah.
So trying to find that space to be able to rediscover what it is that made me want to do this in the first place has been one of the very few good things that 2020 has brought. You know what I mean?
Oh, 100%. Man, I will never take live performance for granted ever again, whether it's going to, I just was thinking back, my last gig, you obviously remember your last gig. My last gig was playing a bass quartet here in San Francisco, and it was to an empty hall because they'd already said people can't come, but you can play. And I thought, okay, whatever, this is weird, but I'm doing something, and I was on a Zoom call with the other 3 members of that bass quartet like a month ago, all 3 of whom are planning or seriously considering just getting out of music because there's no, they're all freelancers. And the hard thing is if you're waiting for somebody to sub out of that gig and now we're in a situation like this, it's like, well, who knows when work will come back in that situation. It's this hard thing of like, there are plenty of people that are figuring it out. Mm-hmm. I have a slight problem with wanting to just throw up your hands and go, well, whatever, it's not what it was, so I guess it can never be. Right. You know what I mean? It's what's frustrating to me, and I'm not just talking individuals, I see this with performing organizations and orchestras too, is that we have to pivot. And I don't mean in terms of like find a new career, but I mean it in terms of like the Philly Orchestra is doing all sorts of interesting things with doing online concerts and finding how to do that in a kind of semi bubble. I mean, Joe Conyers has been documenting some of that. There are ways forward. Unfortunately, it is a lot easier to do that when you have a kind of cushion monetarily than it is to go all of a sudden my only source of income is completely gone. But there's an interesting interview that I saw a couple of years ago with I can't think of his name in the moment. He's in Pose and was in Kiki Boots for a long time. Anyway, he was talking about wanting to do theater and doing readings of theater in, front parlor rooms of these apartments on the Upper West Side, and was kind of making the point that like, if you're not interested in doing that, you can't be interested in being on Broadway. So I think that we find ourselves in a situation where we have got to figure out a way to subsist until that comes back. And it's getting harder and harder by the day. I think that will change now that more and more people are back at work and are willing to hear that, hey, we're still here, we're still not working. That's a difficult thing to sell when we're like, well, yeah, of course you're not working, no one's working. Right.
If we're talking about one subsection of the population, that's a lot easier flag to wave than, well, yeah, I'm sorry you have this bad situation, but like, my entire family's laid off as well. So like, we're kind of in the same boat. I don't have the answer, unfortunately, which is a frustrating thing to provide a problem and not provide an answer. But at the same time, it's like there are ways that we can subsist, whether it's through Patreon or other things. But I have a severe problem, especially with a lot of the performing arts organizations here in New York specifically, that are just completely unwilling to challenge the norm and are completely unwilling to find a way forward, whether it's through smaller concerts or digital performances like how Philly or the London Symphony are doing things. It's just this stuck in the mud mentality of just like, well, if we can't have butts in seats and we can't do it in front of people, then we can't do anything. And we just throw up our hands and and give up. And I seriously question that way of thinking, because it's just, that leads to the death of the industry of just like, well, it can't be the way that it was, so we might as well just do nothing.
This episode is brought to you by Dorico, the advanced music notation software from Steinberg. And one of the things that is a very intentional decision, but also a little perplexing if you're coming from other pieces of software, is that when you start, there's no time signature. It's just a single quarter rest. That opens the door for so much creativity. And here is Daniel Spreadbury, Senior Product Manager of Dorico, on why they made that design decision.
We really wanted to make it clear that when you start a piece of music in Dorico, it's really like starting from a blank piece of paper, no matter how true that really is in Sibelius and Finale, because of course you can change all those things, sometimes at a cost. If you've already written some music in Finale and then you change the time signature, you can have a lot of ties and all sorts of other stuff to clean up, which you won't have in Dorico. But it's just that kind of hopefully inviting. I mean, some people might say, oh, it's a bit daunting. There's literally nothing there but 1 quarter rest. I've got to decide everything. But yes, you do. You're the creative person. You do have to decide everything.
This is one of the many design decisions that I think is totally brilliant in Dorico. It has opened the door for my own personal creativity, and it's such a beautiful product. I can't say enough good things about it. I use it every single day. There is a free version, Dorico SE, that gives you practically all the options that the full version of Dorico gives you, up to 2 stabs. So if you're doing bass duets or any kind of duets like that or exercises, that's more than enough. Dorico.com will take you to their page on Steinberg's website. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. Every day when I sit down to practice, I get out my phone and I boot up Modacity, which is my practicing companion. And I have a specific routine I go through. And here is Modacity founder and CEO Mark Gelfo on what he does each day with Modacity.
What I do when I load Modacity every day is, if I don't have a playlist constructed already, what I do is I go in and I think, how long do I have to practice right now? Okay, I've got 40 minutes. Cool, I'm going to do 5 minutes on meditation, get my body state right. I'm going to do scales for 5 minutes, and I'm going to visualize, and I'm going to do this piece that I'm working on. You just set it up, see the budget, and follow the budget effortlessly by delegating that to the phone.
Letting my phone do all those logging details has been so great for my practicing. I can't recommend this app highly enough. Love it, love it, love it. Learn more at modacity.co. And we have a special offer if you go to our site for lifetime access to this app. It's so cool. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Modacity. Yeah, it's really interesting to see what an organization's made of, like in moments like this. And so you see somebody like Philly who is going, and then kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. I'm watching this bizarro lyric opera of Chicago administration video that I think was intended for the company, but was put out privately or put out publicly. And I'm listening to this like strange speech, ranting about the unions and delivered in just a,
This is my thing. And I'll stand on my soapbox here for a minute.
No problem.
If there was ever a time for union solidarity, it's now. I know that, it's not something that a lot of people fully understand. And I know that we're talking about a subsection of people that are in union AFM position jobs. But the problem is, when things do come back, and I'm speaking from my experience with theater, is that I know that the producers are going to come back and say, we have to give you a pay cut because the only way that we're going to be able to give you jobs is if we are able to take the labor costs down. I don't think anybody is foolish enough to think that that's not a reasonable request. However, we're going to find ourselves in a situation where they're going to complain about the cost of labor being too high. They're not going to want to take our safety concerns seriously. And if there is ever a time for us to band together and just be like, look, we are willing to compromise here, but we're not willing to put ourselves in the poorhouse or put ourselves at risk in order to do this show. Like it's not that important. I mean, I love what I do. It's a huge part of who I am, but I'm not going to put myself and others at risk in order to put on a performance.
Right.
And I think that we are going to find ourselves in a situation where there's going to be more and more people that are going to want to take advantage of this desperation that we've been talking about And I think that a huge way forward is wanting to have solidarity, whether it's union or not. And it's without delving too much into politics, it'll be nice to have somebody in charge who is very pro-union, and I have some feeling will be at least willing to hear those concerns. So that's my 2 cents on it, and I really sincerely hope that AFM is going to put more and more work and money into organizing people that used to be union, whether it's club dates or wedding bands, and really putting the word out of just like, look, people are going to be wanting to take advantage of you because they know you're in a desperate situation more so than you ever have been before. Here's what we're advocating for, and here's what we're pushing for. And there's going to be people that are going to be willing to undercut that and just go, well, I don't care. I need to make money. And I understand that, and I would never fault anybody for that. But I really hope that people kind of heed that call to band together and really work towards, if not changing the dynamic, at least willing to have those conversations and be in it together and look out for each other, rather than this kind of scattershot approach to just doing whatever we want and living with the results.
Yeah, it's a tough thing. And I've been an AFM member for 20 years, I think, at this point. So it's one of those things. I think back 20 years ago, I think, well, I have to pay $300 to join the 10208 union in Chicago. Oh, they're taking this and that. And then over the years, and I've done the percentage of my income has been so much smaller in that sort of world than yours or many other people. But still, a few years into it, I realized, these off the books gigs, they're still paying $100, and they were paying $100.
Right.
The people back in the 80s that were doing, my union gig, I'm getting I have a pension, I have this and that. And it's one of those things that I think sometimes in our excitement to just get out there and work, those kind of little more nuanced lessons, like what we were just describing, those we sort of gloss over that. I want to work, I'll do it for anything. And then, but artists have been getting taken advantage of probably for centuries. And so
it's a thing of like, I find myself, because I always kind of loved theater, but falling into it as a profession was I don't think was necessarily what I always wanted to do. I just kind of wanted to play bass, and in whatever situation that was, I'd figure it out. What's interesting about theater is that it has provided me the opportunity to have this kind of day job type gig, for lack of a better term, so that when I do want to take those $50 singer-songwriter gigs, I can. Yeah. And I'm not losing money on it, and I'm not devoting my time to something that is not going to pay me back, no pun intended. It's but not everybody's in that kind of situation, and I completely understand. It's just like we're going to be finding ourselves, when things do come back, I have a feeling we're going to find ourselves in a more and more predatory, people are going to want to take advantage of that. And I'm kind of putting it out there that like, now is the time to have your antenna up and be really thinking about how you're going to deal with those situations when they arise, because they will. Yeah. So yeah.
It's a nuanced thing, because you want those $50 singer-songwriter gigs to exist, because that's how people get going. You can't have this giant infrastructure for just like trying out your goofy idea. I remember having a conversation, or not so goofy idea also. I remember having a conversation with Cliff Colnett maybe 15 years ago. He is many things, but he has been the conductor at DePaul University for years and years. He's been the conductor for the contemporary music series of the Chicago Symphony. But he's also well known as a jingle writer and arranger. And I remember he was talking about doing arrangements for Bond, this sort of glamorous all-female string quartet. And he said, that's a gig I do for the money. And then this other thing, I don't even think he took I might be getting this wrong, but this is just what the rumor is, that he didn't even take a salary from DePaul. He just loved it. So there are things I do for love and things I do for money. And we all don't have the same opportunities, but I think about that in my life too. There are a lot of things I will 100% do for free or for like nothing, but then there are other things we have to exist and make a living, and so it's a super complicated topic.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a conversation that we're going to continue to have over years and years and years. It's just, anybody that will listen to me, I'm the one who's saying, like, look, we have got to figure out how to navigate these waters now, because when things come back, they're just going to be like, well, we've been closed down for 7 months, or we haven't had any income for 7 months, so we can't really pay you anything other than some chicken fingers, but go play a 4-hour set for us. That ain't going to cut the mustard. So it's like, you need to figure out how to deal with those situations now. And I sincerely hope that the musicians union is going to be able to put some more people in the field as far as organizing that kind of gig a little bit more, because it's become this vibe for basically Broadway and orchestras and film dates, which is really only ever one city.
Right.
So it's like, well, you can, I mean, and they're also a business of like, you can make more money if you're able to get more people in and take more work dues and blah, blah, blah. It's, again, I'll end up going down the rabbit hole of things that I have to say about the union as much as I love them. But yeah, I don't want to spend 3 hours talking your head off about all that.
Well, one of the things I've sort of realized about having this platform, I guess we can call it, and kind of in my situation, is I don't really have a horse in any particular race, and I've sort of been realizing the advantages of that. Like, not that if I was playing in the San Francisco and I was talking symphony and I was talking smack about them, I guess they might not fire me. But like, I really am unfireable. People can just stop listening to me, I guess. But and I've been thinking about that, especially in terms of academia, because and I think that's how we I think you messaged me and said, hey, because I was talking to, I believe it was Jason Haham I was talking to, the timpanist for the Met, who I've had on a couple times, the sort of person I could have on every week, and we never run out of things to say. But just thinking about, and again, welcome to another giant topic we can't solve on this episode. But I think it's important for someone, or I feel like it's important for me at least since I don't have a horse in this race, to really talk about what's the value of music school. Should I pay $200,000 to go to music school? Sub question, should I pay $200,000 at all, or especially during a pandemic? And it's been interesting because I've had a couple of people in academia who are doing really innovative things that I've chatted with, and I've got another one coming up next week. But then I've talked to a lot of people off the books who are, freaking out, understandably. So there's a giant topic I just threw into the room.
Well, I think it's important. I'll give you a little bit of my resume. I went to Berkeley. I did 2 years, and then I dropped out and just went, nose down into professional world as hard as I could. I think it's important to understand that colleges are a business. Mm-hmm. The only way that a business is going to change is if their money is taken away. So if you're going to continue to pay them $200,000 a year to continue to put out extremely qualified musicians for about 4 spots, of course, it's going to become this cyclical type thing and until we are willing to challenge that business model, it will not change. Mm-hmm. And if anything has sort of planted that seed, it's been 2020. I mean, the fact that we have people in academia who are in the year 2020 just now kind of understanding what a virtual meeting is, or how to record yourself or videotape yourself, or work in just the basic level of GarageBand is shocking to me. Mm-hmm. Because I got to say, as somebody who came from the kind of pop and jazz world, it's pathetic that we are putting out an entire subclass of people that can play Brahms all day long or whatever it might be, But the minute that you ask them to be like, hey, can you play on this remote session? They're like, how do I do that? Or how do I budget myself? Or how do I set up a website? Which quite frankly is very 2005, but like that it's a situation where I feel like we have got this sliver of what it means to be a professional musician down pat. If we're talking about how to perform these things to the best of their ability, that's great. I don't have a problem with that. I have some opinions about that, but I don't have a problem about that. There is an entire swath of information, whether it is how to record yourself, how to improvise, how to handle yourselves on these type of gigs, how to budget, that we just aren't touching. And then we kick these kids out the door with $200,000 in debt, and they are wildly unprepared for what it means to be a freelance musician in whatever major city. And then they end up getting discouraged and move on to other things, which there's nothing wrong with that. It's just like, I have an issue with so many large schools that are just stuck in this way of, well, the only gig that you can get is in an orchestra. Okay, how many chairs are open in orchestras? Well, depending on your instrument, probably 5 to 10 a year. Nobody ever gives them up until they retire or they die or they get a better job. So, okay, let's just take the United States as an example. Let's say for argument's purposes, we're putting out 200 bass players who have a master's in performance for 5 chairs. And each year we're adding another 200 and another 200 and another 200. So at a certain point, the supply and demand chain that we all learned about in 6th grade social studies is broken.
Right.
So we've got to figure out a way to be able to communicate, this is not the only path. And I don't think that will change until the incoming students are willing to challenge academia. And I think that it is incumbent upon people that are in teaching positions, especially people that are not adjunct, which is a whole other thing, but to be willing to challenge the norm, especially in music academia, because I think that I have a feeling, and again, I speak for only myself, that we are failing an entire generation of future musicians how to make careers.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, it's and again another bafflingly complicated topic, but it's I think it's the what do most people do? Some type of freelance hybrid career, right? And even if like you're working on Broadway for extended stints or touring, but then things come and go and things change, and even if you are one of those 5 people on your instrument a year that lands a job, you're still probably going to be working outside of that job, or we hope. And I think about all the gigs I've played, and somebody had the idea to create that gig. Somebody had the idea to create that music. So like taking more of an abundance mindset. And there are plenty of things. Anybody who's been really committed and open-minded in terms of music that I've worked with as a student, they've always succeeded. They've probably not succeeded exactly like they thought. Some of them have. A low percentage, but yeah, the vast majority of people are going to be freelancers. Well, okay, and generalizing here, but from my experience, just about everybody teaching at a fairly reputable conservatory they're playing in an orchestra. Where does Northwestern, DePaul, people like that, where do they hire from? They hire from the Chicago Symphony. It's so those people just.
Well,
yeah.
Sorry, buckle up, because this is my number one biggest problem with music academia.
Okay.
Is we hire people that either have steady, great careers, or we hire people that are woefully underprepared for teaching kids to have those types of careers. So perfect example. I won't name the school, or I won't name names. When I'm on tour, I try and reach out to universities around where we're touring, just to be like, I do have a formal presentation if you want that, but I kind of just go, look, when is your orchestral excerpts class? When, or if it's a smaller university, like, when do you have 3 or 4 kids in a room, or can we meet for coffee? And I just want to meet people and be like, look, getting a chair in an orchestra is not the only way forward. This is what I do. This is the expertise that I can offer you. If you're interested in doing theater, here's the things to look at. But I remember I was at a university and I messaged the professor there, and I just looked at his resume just to be like, I wonder if we know any of the same people. The bass world's so small. And he had done 1 season in a small regional orchestra somewhere in the Midwest, I don't remember where, and then had gotten a job teaching, a full professorship. And I had a problem with just like, and it's nothing against him personally, it's just like, well, okay, but what do you know? And I understand that from an academic perspective, it's very easy to point to somebody that has the doctorate and go, well, they clearly know what they're talking about. My issue becomes that when we're talking about a huge population of music students that are going to be doing some kind of mixed freelance thing, there needs to be people that are teaching them how to do that. And we don't have that right now. And I understand that from, like I said, from an academic perspective, I can throw down a 48-page resume of every gig I've ever done. I could have played with the most important people in the world. I could have toured Beyonce for 23 years, and they will every time hire somebody who has a doctorate. And I question that mentality because I just go, look, there's nothing wrong with that. I completely understand why you want to have somebody who is committed to the kind of academic perspective. But in the same way that we have master classes, in the same way that we have, informal talks from professionals, I think that injection of a different perspective is very important. And we are very unwilling to break that mold of just like, well, the only people that can teach music are the people that have degrees. I know that I'm not an incredible teacher. I also haven't done a ton of it, quite frankly, but I know that I have a perspective that is useful. And I know that because I keep getting hired.
Right.
And I don't mean for that to sound conceited, but I'm just like, okay, well, clearly I'm doing something right if I keep getting a call to do this. So what is it about my playing that makes people want to do that? What is that about my personality, whatever it might be? And then being able to inform of just like, okay, I see why you're playing this over these changes. Have you thought about doing this? Because when I did this session with this person back in the day, they told me this, and think about it this way. It's that I also, with the caveat that works a little bit better in more improvised music than it does in classical, because classical is literally you're playing what's on the page and you either played it correctly or not. But like I said, I think that there is a huge swath of students that are underserved by people that are unwilling to listen to what people that are kind of traditionally dismissed by academia have to say.
Yep.
That's my 2 cents.
Well, it's not to be mean to anybody that's got a doctorate, but we would always joke around in bass sections I would play, and it's like, more degrees you have, the worse you play. It's like, oh great, here he comes with the doctorate playing out of tune, and it's just like and this is a generalization, but it tends to be the safe choice. Staying in school, that's like the most obvious thing to do. Like, oh, I know school, I've been in it since I was 5. Oh, I'm not going to go, cut my teeth and move to New York City and take a chance, and so. It's challenging. I remember either talking with Gary Carr or reading an interview with him or somebody. There's somebody who's incredibly open-minded just in the way he approached his career. And if he didn't know how to do something, he'd invite somebody in to talk about it. So that, like, even if you only, there are tons of things I don't know about music and the bass, but I know people who do know those things. And so bringing them in and just having that open-minded abundance kind of approach to, and I think it's just so, it's this self-perpetuating system. So often, like, the people that get hired in jobs like that tend to be either get doctorates or they tend to be people who've risen to the top of the ranks in performance. So all they know how to do is how to get into the Chicago Symphony, let's say. So, I'll train you how to get into the Chicago Symphony. There's one opening every 25 years. I guess maybe that's not the most, but there's a beauty to just learning your craft to the highest level, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I've sort of thought, like, thinking about like college, and so another question that comes up is like, well, why go to college at all? What's the point? I think for most 18-year-olds, they probably lack the discipline to learn everything that college teaches on their own, right? There's just so much in that environment. Right, yeah, me too. Hands up.
Yeah, me too.
Like, could I,
Yeah.
and it would have been a lot harder in 1994 when I started. These days, could you really just immerse yourself and learn on YouTube and buy a couple online courses and take some Zoom lessons with people? Probably you could get close, but who's going to do, I would just sit around playing video games all the time.
Right. Well, I mean, I will say that, and I think I talked about this with you on the last episode.
Yeah.
I really sincerely wish that I had gone to a place that kicked my butt a little bit more. Mm-hmm. Berkeley is kind of an artist collective. It's less a school; it's more of a gestation for 4 years.
Sure.
Is the way that I've always put it. That being said, I don't want it to sound, I know it does sound, I don't want it to sound like I'm saying to anybody to not go to college, because Berkeley for me was so transformative, and the people that I have met there are, I mean, to this day, they live a block away, are some of my closest friends. And the connections that I have made through there are incredible. I mean, it's great. Like I watched SNL last week, and it's like, wow, okay, my buddy Keithan's playing with her, and Maddie's the new guitarist in the band. Like, wow, that's amazing. That's so cool for the people that I went to school with. I would say that it's a hard line to walk, because I feel like my private lessons that I take with Oren O'Brien, and those lessons, I have learned more than I ever did in college. And I think a large part of that is just I have time to absorb that information more. And I also have a more honest understanding of who I am and what my playing is. That's the playing side of it. The personal side of it is the people that I have met there are, to this day, still getting me jobs and are still recommending me for things. So there is something about, like I was this kid from Columbus who was doing okay, and I came into Boston, and all of a sudden I wasn't the best kid in my town anymore, and I had to figure out how to navigate that. And I was like, oh wow, these kids are way better than me. What do I do with that information? And it's that being honest with yourself and being in rooms with people that are better than you is so invaluable, that I wouldn't want anybody to trade that experience. But I think that there is a large part of that experience that can still be informed upon by a different outside perspective than somebody that has a doctorate. Not knocking anyone that has a doctorate, but you get what I'm saying, that I feel like you can have the best of both worlds. You can have somebody who has a doctorate from Eastman and, can teach you how to play, Ein Heldenleben until the day is long. But if all you've got is Ein Heldenleben, you're not left with a lot. That's just my perspective.
Yeah. No, I hear that. I remember that coming from being a small fish in a big pond. That experience is so invaluable. I remember getting to Northwestern my first week. My dad drove me out from South Dakota, and he was talking to the assistant conductor. He said, Jason was the #1 all-state bass player from South Dakota. And the conductor was like, oh, wow. Okay. And I still think of the percentage of the work I've had in my life that I can directly tie to those years at Northwestern. It's tremendous. So there is, so but at what cost, and a former student of mine, I remember this goes back like 10, 12 years ago. We were sitting around. He had gotten into Indiana University, completely full ride, 100%.
Wow.
Got into Juilliard, not one dime. I might be getting this a little bit wrong, but something like that, right? And so we were having the conversation, Juilliard or Indiana, which those are both great schools. But the point I made to his parents is like, look, you could think about send him to a summer festival. That's only going to cost like $2,000. That's $48,000 left to go. Take a couple of lessons with some of the best teachers. You augment that. Not that you need to augment Indiana at all, but if anyone's in a similar situation, which a lot of people are, if the college is great. This is my opinion. College is great, but at what cost, right? I just, so you get the chance to work with someone like Oren O'Brien. There are so many people that we would want to work with that would be willing to work with us on a one-on-one basis. We don't necessarily have to go to USC or Rice. Maybe in some cases we do, but I just firmly believe there are a lot of incredible musical educational experiences you could be having at many schools that are not Juilliard or Northwestern, and it's just it's one of those things that's I don't know, it's a tough thing to wrap your head around, and then anyway, it's a huge topic.
Well, it's a huge topic, but I mean, like, here's a good example. My elevator pitch version of this opinion is that if you're purely focused on performance and that's all you want to do, I feel like there are better routes for you to take than college. Now, I want to say that I'm talking in pop, rock, jazz, that kind of world. Classical world, you need a little bit. I feel like you need a little bit more hands-on approaches to things than you necessarily do with sort of things that fall under the improvised genre. That being said, though, it's this odd thing of, I met Oren because I was subbing for a buddy of mine on a reading of a children's show. She happened to come to a performance, and I was just walking out in the lobby, like heading home to whatever. And she stopped me, and I had no idea who she was, because it was after the gig. And she's like, "Oh, you sounded amazing. I'm a bass player as well." And I was like, "Oh, great." And like, as I'm talking to her, I'm like, "Oh, you're Oren O'Brien." Like, I've seen that picture of like Lenny holding your face. Like, yeah. And I just asked her. I was just like, "Hey, do you teach privately? I know you teach at Juilliard here. But she's like, "Yeah, here, look me up." It's another thing in the union. She's like, "Look me up in the union book, shoot me an email, and we'll figure out a time." So I shot her an email, and now all of a sudden, I take with her when I can, which unfortunately hasn't been a lot recently. But it's had I not been out on a gig, and she had seen me play, even just this children's musical where I'm probably just playing root fifth most of the time, and I don't know if she would have taken me seriously and been willing to talk to me. I don't think she's that kind of person, but I just mean, like, there is something to be said for being on a bandstand and being taught in a kind of apprentice way. I live right down the block from the union hall for the plumbers here, and every year they end up having a huge line of people that wait outside of this union hall to get apprenticeships. And I ended up talking to one of them one time, and they're like, "Yeah, they're 19." And it's like, well, you set up for that kind of a job, and you learn from these guys that have been doing it for 30 years. I don't know. I think that I think if you're not looking to go into specifically orchestral music, which I I think there's more and more of those people that are falling into that camp every year. I think there's something to be said from on-the-job experience, or at least learning from people that have a huge swath of on-the-job experience.
Heck yes. And even in orchestral performance, like who we were talking about earlier, Jason Haheim, no music school, was working at a PhD in the sciences. Ali Yazdinfar, who's principal bass of Montreal and he used to be the National Symphony, no music school. I think he got an engineering degree. Right. It's so much of what we do is a trade, and thinking of it in that sort of apprenticeship model, it's what we do in private lessons. I mean, it's so similar to the plumbers union.
Well, it's almost like to bring it into the personal side of things, it's almost like if you have a friend, they will find time to hang out with you. Mm-hmm. Music is kind of the same way, where it's like, if it's what you want to do, you will find a way to do it. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's important to be able to equip people with the tools to best go forward into that. And I just don't think we're doing that right now, especially what I see in people that are interested in going more into the pop and rock world. There's very much something to be said for, like, when I was at Berklee and taking a music business class or taking a music tech class and learning how to work in a Logic and what a DAW is and how to videotape yourself. That stuff has come more into play in 2020 than it ever has before.
Right.
That's like I said earlier, I think the fact that we are not teaching kids how to record themselves is shocking. It's like, that is part of what it is. And this is what it's going to be like going forward. I mean, like the whole idea of Skype lessons was kind of like a fringe thing of like, oh, well, if it's somebody super famous, I'll take an hour with them on a Skype lesson. But like, now that entire thing has moved to that realm, and there's more and more people that are putting their playing out on Instagram, and how to, understanding how to do remote recording, understanding how to film yourself, do music notation, any of that stuff is so much more important than it ever has been. And we're just underserving that more so now than ever.
Well, I did an exercise just before we talked 4 years ago, I think when I was moving out to San Francisco. I don't know what possessed me to do this, but I got out my college transcripts. Again, I must have been in a weird state of mind. And I looked through everything I had taken, and then I thought about everything I'd done in my life and what on that transcript related to what. And it's interesting because some things really related. My sophomore year creative writing class. Oh my goodness, have I used that a lot? I've done so much more accompanying with my horrible hacky piano skills and arranging and other conducting things, bass obviously, and then all the other things that weren't even a thing in the 90s, but although they had a version of what's out here in terms of recording and video editing and the like. But yeah, it's interesting, and it's you said a few minutes ago, like, if this is what you want to do, or you'll find a way to do it. And I just so firmly believe in that. I was much more pessimistic about that maybe 10, 15 years ago, but I've just seen so many young people that I've worked with make it work. Whether that's playing jazz gigs here in the Bay Area, former student of mine's doing that. Another former student's principal bass of the Lyric Opera of Chicago. Other people are, some people are working overseas in various capacities. Anybody who's committed and open-minded, I just haven't seen anybody not do. I've seen people not do it, but they are their own enemy, and they're limiting their options or their possibilities from their mindset and their work ethic. But it's incredible. I feel, and I know it's like a really bizarro, horrible time, 2020, obviously, for everybody, but particularly people who make their living playing in cramped quarters with thousands of people. But zoom out, pandemics end, and people do find a way to make it work. But if you're saddled with $200,000, $300,000 of debt, no matter what you're going to do, even if you have like a six-figure job that's going to be in your way, but if you're scrambling to take $100 bar gigs and sub every once in a while, there's that level of pressure. I mean,
like I said, the best advice I ever got was from my teacher, Dave Buddha at Berkeley. He said, if there's anything else that you can think of doing besides music, do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because like now, if this is what you want to do, you will figure out how to do it. And it's going to be really hard. And you're going to have to give up a lot of things that normal people get to have. But if you're going to do it, you're going to do it. I was just recently reading The War of Art.
Oh yeah, Stephen Pressfield. That's a great book.
Yes. Well, and so a big part of that book is about making commitments to yourself and sticking to self-made deadlines.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that thing of like, when this pandemic first started, I was like, okay, every week I'm going to transcribe something and I'm going to record myself doing it. Because for one, it's a chance for me to be able to get my logic skills back in order. Not to mention that, hey, more content of me playing up. What's the worst that can happen? Somebody doesn't like it. But the other part of it was just me kind of having this accountability of just like, look, if 4 people watch this, that's fine. This is what I was working on this week. It was almost a kind of pseudo, like those Instagram accounts of like 100 days of practice.
Yep.
Of just like, look, this is what I'm working on this week. And if you happen to like it, cool. If not, like, whatever, it's not a big deal. This is just for me. And it's that same type of mentality that goes forward. Just like, look, I'm just going to keep doing this and eventually it'll break. And, it is that thing of like, you will find a way. In the same way that your friends will find time to hang out with you, if they're really your friends, you will find a way to do this. But it's up to you. Nobody else is going to do it for you. And like, I think that's the biggest takeaway that I have from my opinions about music education, is that it's just like, look, we can give you all of these skills and all this information. You can go to the best schools, but at the end of the day, it's you. You're the only person that can be accountable for you. So this mentality of, if I can just get into this school and this will give me this leg up, is just fundamentally wrong. Now, there are great teachers at those great schools, but like I said, the idea that, if I just have a degree from Indiana, if I just have a degree from USC, that'll get me good gigs. I have never once in my entire life been asked to show my degree, which I don't have. I've never been asked to have my degree on the bandstand. It's like, that idea is very understandable for many other careers, but I think when you're talking about working in the creative field, this transactional relationship that you have with the school is broken.
Yeah.
And I think we can do a better job of helping people get jobs outside of the school, in the same way that people have internships in business classes or whatever it might be. We can do a better job of that, because like I said, I don't think it's not necessarily important to, if I just get to the school, I'll be able to get those kinds of gigs, is just wrong. And if there's anything that I can ever impress upon people that are looking at going to school, is that idea of like, well, I'm an electric bass player, and if I can just get into Berkeley and I can just get taught by this person, I can end up on the Grammys one day. It's like, well, yeah, that is a step on the ladder, but to say, well, if I just do this, that'll do this. Like, had you, in the same way that had you told me in January of this year that I would have to be wearing a mask and gloves to go to the grocery store, I wouldn't have believed you. It's that same thing that if you had told me, like, when I was 18, that like, well, Broadway is going to be your main source of income, I would have been like, really? Okay. Sure. Like, I like it. I didn't think it was going to be my main thing, but okay, here we are. So like, yeah, Anyway, I'm getting off topic.
No, that's okay.
You get my idea.
There is no topic for this. That's the beautiful thing. A book along the lines of the War of Art I've been reading is Seth Godin's latest book, The Practice, which is really interesting. It's right along the lines of you talking about doing a weekly transcription. You know, Seth's line he uses all the time is, "Here, I made this." Just actually shipping something.
Right.
It doesn't matter if only 4 people check it out, but just getting in that practice. The difference, in his words, between a professional and amateur is a professional shows up regardless of whether he or she wants to or not, right? I've been, since the pandemic started, I've been putting out a video a week, and I hadn't been doing any videos, and the first videos were horrible. I couldn't even remember how to do the ISO on my camera. I looked like a ghost.
Right.
And then, I'm getting better. Am I ever going to need that skill exactly in 4 years when I'm doing more traveling? Maybe, but what I am doing is getting better at storytelling, and maybe that'll be something that
But really, I mean, to zero in on that, but what you're really doing is getting better at your craft.
Yes, exactly.
The difference between craft and creativity is huge. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a quote from Christoph Niemann. He's the illustrator for the New Yorker, and he was like, "You have to create this wall of craft around you so that you can do unembarrassing work on demand." Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how I have taken 2020 is I'm just like, well, look, I'm not going to be able to work on my creativity as much because that, quite frankly, involves other people. Not for everybody, but for how I like to create, I need to be with other people. I can spend this time working on my craft. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing that I've had the biggest takeaway is it's just like, even if I just sat down and I didn't want to play today, but I did my arpeggios, I still fed that craft monster that kind of always looms over you. But it's that idea of like, there is a fundamental difference between those two things. Creativity is probably not going to be able to happen very much in 2020. It has a couple of times for me. I've been able to do some remote sessions and things like that. But back to our conversation about education and college is about developing your craft. Mm-hmm. And I think that there are ways to be able to also be able to develop your creativity that I don't think we are necessarily facing right now. But it's that divide is what I think is missing in terms of it's just like, well, not every gig is going to be the most creatively enriching thing in the world, but your craft needs to be good enough to make it seem like it is.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yep. David White knocking it out of the park again. I will be sure to link up to our chat from, I can't believe it's 4 years ago, because I remember that, I think I titled it something about networking, because we were talking about how networking isn't rocket science, but it kind of is in some ways, and you are certainly a great example of that. And it's something, talk about something that is not taught. Like, I don't think I had anybody even, broach that subject in college when I was at college, but how, and it's something I've developed. I guess it's become a part of my craft for sure with this podcast and everything else in my life. But it's cool, man. We got to we got to have you on more than once every 4 years. I had way too much to drink a couple of weeks ago and ordered these microphones, and I don't even remember doing it. So I have two. I have two of these, quasi, podcast studio mics now. So whenever you start traveling again, and you make your way back out to San Francisco, let's hang out. Let's do an in-person one of these. I live in a cool part of town.
I guarantee you I'll be back out there again, man.
Oh, yeah.
Like I just hope that the Tenderloin is a little less intimidating than it was the last time.
We'll bring you up to North Beach, where I'm at next time. Yeah, the Tenderloin. That's it's always colorful. That theater, the Golden Gate Theater that David was playing at. It's right on the edge of a very rough part of San Francisco, and it's just this bizarre mixture of people going out to the theater, all sorts of depravity.
Listen, man, I live in New York. It takes a lot to intimidate me. There were some times there where I was just walking down to a Phil's Coffee, and I was just like, wow, this is a lot.
Yeah.
Even for me. I lived in New York for 8 years now. I was like, man, okay. Great.
Well, I've seen almost zero live music since the pandemic started. Luckily, we live in a milder climate here, so as it gets colder, people are still out playing. I have seen a little bit, but for months, the only music I heard was one guy walking down the streets of my neighborhood playing an accordion, playing "What a Wonderful World," and then at a certain point, he started wearing a mask, which is like so perfectly San Francisco.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, yeah, there's some interesting people in that town, man. That whole vibe of there's a couple of guys I remember over in the feel free to edit this out, Jason. But there's a couple of guys I remember we were the keyboardist and I were staying in a place over in Noe Valley, which was like if you just go over the next hill, you'll be in Castro.
Yep. And
there was all of these people there in the Castro that had they would just put their genitals in a sock and walk around completely naked. Other than that, and I was just like, "Wow, San Fran is a town, man.
Yeah. Oh, that's
some interesting people here."
Yeah, well, my neighborhood is it's like the land of old men wearing funny hats. It's the original beatnik part of town, North Beach. It's Ginsburg and Kerouac and all these people. They're all the old bars and cafes, and it's actually it's one of the few San Francisco neighborhoods that still kind of feels like old San Francisco. Like there's no sort of feeling of tech. And it's one of those neighborhoods that had the paper would put out a story every couple months about, oh no, North Beach is dying, the businesses are going out. But actually, since the pandemic started, it's actually things weren't like going super smooth in San Francisco anyway before the pandemic. And in a way, certainly in my part of town, it's almost seemed to be a real silver lining. Like a lot of people that have been like some of these vacant storefronts, they've bizarrely opened up. Then there are these like art markets and all sorts of stuff. So there's a lot of music here. So
it's that old Jurassic Park quote, man. Life finds a way.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm really curious to see what New York is going to be like this time next year.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
David, thanks for chatting. We got to do it more often than once every 4 years for sure. DavidWhiteBass.com is his website. Check that out. Check out his YouTube channel. And yeah, super cool guy that I love connecting with. And it's so fun to meet somebody over the podcast remotely and then to hang out with them in person. That's happened more and more often in my life as I just accumulate more experiences like that. It's so great. And of course, now things I took for granted. Hey, I'll go check out a show. Boy, I would love to check out a show. I don't know. I'm slowly losing my mind. If you haven't been able to tell, this is episode 4 of 4, and I am refusing to edit these outros. So we'll see if anything weird happens. But yeah. So why do I do them in batches like this? Well, podcasting, here's advice from someone who's done this for a disturbingly long time as I take a drink of water. Podcasting is there's nothing hard about podcasting, but it's a bunch of little steps. It's just a whole bunch of little steps. In fact, I've been using this program Trello to keep track of what I have to do on my end after talking with the person. So there is the interview itself, which is the fun part, the conversation. I always feel like interview is pretentious because I don't feel like I'm interviewing anybody. I'm just talking to people. Although that's not true because there is the skill, the soft skill, but maybe one of the life's most important skills of being able to propel the conversation, really listen. It's an improvisation, right? It's like trading fours or something like that, maybe. So there's that. And there's the research. That's fun. I always find it fun. Anyway, research is fun to me. And then chatting with a person, and then it goes into Dropbox. Then, once every 2 weeks, I dip in there, and here's what I have on my list. Audio raw edit, which I always do. Audio technical edit, which I usually ship to Michael Cooper and Steve Hinchy. I have just been really bad about staying as ahead as I'd like, so I've been doing a lot of these myself. But I have people that are willing to do this for me, so I got to get back in that habit. So that's been on my list just because I'm an idiot and I can't get my act together. Then images and all of these things. They don't take long, but they take longer than you might think. The images thing, that takes a little bit of time. I'd sit down and do 4 images, but there's an image that goes on the website. There's an image that's the highest possible resolution that we use for social media. There's another stinking image format that Apple requires. So I got to do that. And then there's a widescreen image that we use for a variety of purposes. So 4 different images plus just a couple other random things. So it's like an hour for the 4 episodes usually. Plus I have to hunt down images. And again, I'm a messy creative, so I always forget to ask people for images. So I'm like, always scrambling at the last minute. Not the total last minute, but kind of. Then there's bumper music, which I've used increasingly less. If you've listened for a long time, you might remember back 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, I used a lot of music from people. I shy away from it now or I don't use it now unless it is 100% indie and not associated with any label for 2 big reasons. Well, first of all, there are all sorts of complications if you're using anything copyrighted. Just don't use copyrighted music. If it's a total indie and they're on, they're releasing stuff through Bandcamp and it's totally cool, that's fine. But the thing is, so these videos go out just as, well, I call them fake videos, just a still image on YouTube, and they'll instantly get demonetized, which I don't care about, but they will also sometimes be blocked, or you could even get a copyright strike against you, which I do care about because that will result in no more YouTube channel after a while. And then more troubling, because this podcast now goes out on Spotify. If Spotify will just remove your podcast. And though the percentage of people listen, thank you if you're listening on Spotify, by the way, the percentage of people listening to this show on Spotify is minuscule compared to the people that are listening through Apple Podcasts or through the app or through Overcast or a bunch of other podcast players or YouTube even. Not many people are listening on Spotify, but Spotify has invested big in podcasting. Joe Rogan has come over there. The whole Gimlet crew. A lot of you probably don't know what I'm talking about, but that's okay. I do way too much podcast business research. I wouldn't be surprised if that percentage does increase, and I really don't want to get removed because it's a little bit of a black box if you do get removed to even figure out what to do. And all the best practices I've checked out say just don't use music. Certainly don't take some AC/DC and put it in the intro and outro. But even if you're talking to somebody that's got their, they're on an indie label and everybody's cool and even the label is cool, you might get in trouble in the future because things change and even if you have some and you just cannot get licensed music for podcasts in any sort of practical way. The reason why, if you're curious, is that it's a download. Even if you think you're streaming this, technically a podcast is a download. So that's a different type of license. It's like selling a CD with that music in the eyes of the recording industry. Anyway, wow, that was a tangent, Jason. But okay, we will truck on. So bumper music, which that was like a 4-minute way of just saying I don't do much of that, but every once in a while I do if it's real indie. Then show notes, which take a little bit of time. And if you look at how little I write about people, you might be surprised it takes that much time, but it's tricky. I don't want to just copy someone's bio because that's kind of boring. And Trevor on my team also thought that seemed kind of dry. So I try to write something about somebody, but I want to be accurate. And if somebody if I get a request to change something I put out publicly, it's usually something I worded in the show notes. So I try to word those as well as possible. Those also become my script for the intro, which I try to keep tight. And these days, the outro, as you can tell, I try to just let it rip because I don't have any outlet in my life where I can just blather on endlessly and not censor myself. I was doing these another tangent. Here we go. I was doing these camera on head, incredibly useful exercises videos with a GoPro on my head, and I just refused to edit any of those. And I think there's value to try to do something that's just raw in your life and put it out there. I think it's a good skill to develop. And it's a similar skill to playing a concert or doing a talk or something like that. In the end, you got to just let it rip, and you can't edit yourself in those kind of situations. So I like to have something in my life like that, particularly when we're in a pandemic and I can edit the heck out of everything I do. So tangent. Jeez, Jason. Okay. Anyway, then ads, which weren't on the list for a while during the beginning of the pandemic. Then we had advertisers come on board, and anyway. So I have to figure out which goes in what episode and put those into a folder. Then the audio intro and outro, which is what you're listening to, the outro. These take way more time than you might think. Honestly, I'll bet the images and the actual intro and outro take about the same amount of time. So these, I'm just making these take more time because I'm yammering on here at the end. I could get in and out real quick, and probably would be less time than the images. Those images take a long time, and I just haven't found help for the images. And part of it's just because anytime you enlist help, you slow down the pace. Now, help is critical to scaling and growing anything, and I do have help, and I'm so thankful that I just haven't figured out a good solution for that. Okay, so there's audio, intro, outro, and then the title of the episode. What are the most important things in many kinds of modern social media type of content? Title and thumbnail. That's what you learn in YouTube school. That's also true, though, to a lesser extent in the podcast world. But titles, I'll tell you, when I go through my bizarrely large number of podcasts I subscribe to, and I see, I'll click on the most interesting title. I got to be honest. So I do try to take a little bit of time. I don't feel like my titles are are anything special, but I'm always trying to hone that with my craft. That takes the least amount of time in anything here, by the way. I just pick 3 words and there we go. Then send to assembly publish queue. That's where Trevor Jones and Mitch Morin come into the act. So I have this Dropbox system, and then I have this folder that says Jason Final Steps. That's where I do all that stuff. Then I move them into that folder, email them, try to just email and get out of my email so I don't start checking my email, because that's an incredible way to procrastinate for me. And then I write the content for the email newsletter that I write, which I don't write all of it, but I write the things that sound like a person's writing it. You know, like Trevor puts together these lists, and the Tuesday email is Trevor, but the hey, what's going on in San Francisco? I'm Jason. I live in San Francisco. I hope it's snowing where you are. Ha ha. You know, that sort of stuff. That is my voice. And that takes longer than you might think. I think that takes, it's probably about as long as these audio. It's probably about as long as the images and the audio and everything. So to do 4 episodes takes me essentially a full work day. So I lose a day. Lose is probably a bad word, but I have to budget. That's a better word. I have to budget a full work day to do these 4 episodes and that's outside of the interview time and the research time. Kind of sounds like a lot now that I think about it. So that's 20. If I work 5 days a week, I do it every 2 weeks. So that's 10% of my time that I allot for work, whatever the heck it is I do that I call work, goes to the podcast. But it's worth it to me. And then I promise I'll shut up. Although I know you can skip ahead or turn it off. But so if you're listening, maybe you want to hear this. But I guess you do want to hear this. But it's worth it to me because I benefit from even these little things I'm talking about right here, the kind of icing on the cake stuff. That's all this intro, outro stuff. I mean, nobody really cares about that stuff. I don't think. It's the meat and potatoes, the middle of the episode that people are interested in, where I'm actually talking with somebody about something. But I have to put the icing on the cake. It doesn't work. You can't eat. Let's take this analogy a little further. You can't eat the cake without the icing, or it doesn't taste very good, or whatever. Terrible analogy. But regardless, those are skills that are good to develop in life. Can I make an image a little more compelling? Can I figure out how to frame something up a little bit better? Can I make that title a little bit tighter? Can I make those show notes a little bit more storytelling-like? So I get some benefit out of doing these steps anyway. I really get a lot of benefit, though, out of the experience of sitting down and talking with somebody. William, come here. My dog is acting like he's about to pee, so I'm going to end this one. Now my dog is right here. William, good boy. Okay, Daddy's got to finish the outro. Okay, then we'll go out. It's okay. It's okay. You're a good boy. Okay. So, maybe that's a good time to wrap it up. Anyway, just final thought. I get so much out of the research process and just connecting with another human being with no devices around, just actually having a conversation for around an hour with somebody. So, it's worth it. It is time. And yeah, I guess what's my point of talking about all this? Just a window inside the process. Okay, I will end this by thanking the team. They are Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Mitch Mooring, and Trevor Jones, who I've mentioned, and Krista Copper. Mitch makes beautiful basses in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Learn more at his website, mitchmooring.com. I am your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.